Hello, everyone. This channel is normally devoted to comedy videos or videos of my son Gabriel, but not today. Today, we're going to look at another passion of mine, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, if you did come to see a cute video of Gabriel, I won't be offended if you don't continue watching. But if you like the MCU as much as I do, then this is the video for you. We are going to cover how to watch the story of Marvel Studios. Should you watch it chronologically or in release date order? And I am hoping by the end of this video, I will convince you that there is only one answer, and that is chronological. But we'll have to see if I convince you by the end. Also, before we can talk about how to watch it chronologically, we have to figure out, what is the order? So let's look to see whether Marvel has given us any clues as to what the order is to watch these movies. Around the time that Avengers came out, Marvel released this very detailed graphic. I am not expecting that you can read everything here, but if you are interested in diving into it, you can find it on the internet and zoom in. But it's very, very helpful graphic that lays out all of the Phase 1 movies, almost scene by scene at times, to tell you the order that they occurred. But what it really indicates is that Marvel, from the very beginning, was thinking about how all these movies fit together and how you would watch them chronologically if you were interested. Also, this graphic mentions Fury's Big Week, which is that week span where a good portion of Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, and Thor all occur. Day by day, it is a crazy sequence. And really interesting that Marvel laid it out that way and called it out from the beginning. And you can actually see some of this as you watch the movies. You see Coulson leaving Iron Man to go discover Thor. You see at one point on a screen in Iron Man 2, you see one of the battles of the Hulk being mentioned. So the movies really did all occur simultaneously, and it's just interesting to see it laid out. But if you notice, this doesn't go into the year that things occur. Instead, it just lists the order they occur, because the assumption is that every movie occurred in the same year that it was released. However, when Marvel moved to their 10-year anniversary, they released this information, which did kind of change around some of the assumptions we'd had up to this point. For example, Iron Man is listed as coming out, as occurring in 2010. So Marvel scrunched the timeline a little bit and brought Iron Man forward by 2 years. Now, I know some people still believe it happened earlier, but, you got to trust Marvel. If that's what they're saying happened, then that's what happened. And it does align with the fact that Iron Man 2 is mentioned to occur 6 months after Iron Man, so that fits well. One of the interesting things, too, that Marvel pretty much admitted to is that the infamous 8 years later graphic that shows up in Homecoming is absolutely incorrect. And we knew it was incorrect. We knew it hadn't been 8 years between Homecoming and Avengers, but Marvel admitted to it, and, in this timeline, solidifies that it was just 4 years, not 8. However, it's not the first time or the only time that 8 years occurred in a movie and was incorrect. In Civil War, Vision mentions it's been 8 years since Iron Man first entered the scene, the infamous I am Iron Man line. But by moving Iron Man up 2 years, it's no longer 8 years. It would have been 8 years in 2008, but now it's only 6. Now, maybe Vision was rounding up, who knows? But either way, basically, if a movie mentions an 8-year time span, it's probably not right. But that said, having these years laid out do sync up many other times. For instance, Ross in Civil War mentions it's been 4 years since the Avengers. And in Thor Ragnarok, Thor mentions it's been 2 years since Age of Ultron. Basically, that's how long Banner had been the Hulk. So it's nice to see that, for the most part, once they have nailed down these years, they've pretty much stuck with them and they fit really well. However, there are a few things that Marvel got wrong here and admitted to later, the first being Avengers Infinity War. It is not in 2017, as we now know, it's 2018. And there's several reasons for this, not the least of which are some references in the movie itself. The movie alludes to it being 2 years since Civil War, when Vision mentions that that's how long he and the Scarlet Witch have been dating. Also, Iron Man Tony Stark alludes to the fact that, Thanos has been in his head for the last 6 years, and that, of course, is alluding to Avengers. So, none of these dates work unless Infinity War is in 2018, and Marvel eventually did officially move it to 2018. And then the other issue is that Black Panther is listed as happening in 2017, when in reality it happened right after Civil War. It basically picks up right after the movie ended. So this is something also that we'll see that Marvel ends up correcting. But it is nice that Marvel has used these dates consistently going forward. For example, in Endgame, they mentioned the year that Avengers, Thor the Dark World, and Guardians of the Galaxy occur during the time heist, and they stuck with these same years. So while I'm not convinced Marvel really had a firm grasp on all the time frames of the movies from day one, it's clear that once they tried to put their, the line in the sand and say, here are the years, they've tried to stick to it, and they've been really consistent going forward. So next, a big jump occurred. An exciting thing occurred with Disney Plus's release. Disney Plus, if you're not a subscriber, what are you waiting for? It's fantastic. But Disney Plus, if you're a subscriber, you can go to a Marvel Cinematic Universe in timeline order. And it lists all of the movies and TV shows and how they all should be watched if you want to watch them chronologically. I want to call out that the direct.com is the one that created this graphic. Direct.com is a fantastic Marvel resource. They're also on Twitter, but their website has all kinds of good information. And they created this real nice graphic because on Disney Plus, it's a long timeline going horizontally, and they've condensed it really nicely here. So I had to use it and give them a little credit. But I will point out that not every movie is in here. Some of the movies, in particular, the Hulk, the 3 Spider-Man movies also, are not in the timeline because Marvel/Disney doesn't have the rights to show them on Disney+. Hulk is owned by Universal, and of course the Spider-Man movies are managed by Sony. Now, supposedly, there's an agreement that eventually the Spider-Man movies will appear on Disney+, and so therefore will appear in the timeline. Unsure if the Hulk will ever make it, but it'd sure be nice. But we do have an idea when Marvel says these movies occurred, because if we look back at their timeline that they released in the 10-year anniversary, they list the Incredible Hulk happening between Iron Man and Thor. And since they all kind of happen at the same time, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, technically, the Incredible Hulk might have started a little bit before Iron Man 2, but they're all basically the same time frame, so we'll go with that, since that's what Marvel's told us. And then Spider-Man Homecoming obviously happens after Civil War and before Doctor Strange. So going with those placements, we can put the Hulk after Iron Man 2, and we can put Spider-Man Homecoming probably after Black Panther and before Doctor Strange, although it really could fit anywhere after Civil War. And then we know that Far From Home and No Way Home fit after Eternals because they happen over summer break the year after Endgame. And we know they happened before Hawkeye, which happened the Christmas after Endgame. So we can kind of place those, but it'll be really nice when they all show up in the timeline. Some other interesting things in the timeline is that Marvel switched the order of Thor and Iron Man, Thor the Dark World and Iron Man 3. You really could watch them in either order, but it is interesting because the beginning of Thor does take place right after Avengers. So you could argue it's a nice continuation to see Loki being taken off to Asgard in chains. Now, the rest of Thor, ironically, happens after Iron Man 3, but still, I think Marvel, probably has the right idea here by putting Thor first in the watch order. Marvel also fixed the issue with Black Panther. If you remember, they had Black Panther happening later, and now they've moved it to become, real close after Civil War. And then one other thing I'll mention that I just think is cool is all of the one-shots are now on Disney+. They used to only be on the CD or DVD release, the DVD or Blu-ray release of certain movies. And now they're on Disney+, which is great. And they have stuck them in the timeline order, which is really cool. So huge asset to have this. Now, let's take a deep dive into the next aspect of the chronology, which is month by month. Now, at no point has Marvel ever released when they think the movies happen month by month. So we won't have that resource from Marvel. But there is a fantastic asset out there called the Marvel Cinematic Universe wiki. So amazingly detailed. I mean, they have spent the time to break every movie and TV show down, not just by year, but by month and by day. It is unbelievable amount of information. So while it is not official, it's still, you're not going to get any better resource than this, where they've taken this much time to try to figure out exactly when everything happened. So I wanted to give them credit because I am going to use their monthly breakdown, not the daily, because that is so detailed, but the monthly breakdown at least. And if you get a chance, go check out their website because it really is fantastic. All right, so before we get into the actual order that I would recommend you watch, I want to try to really convince you why you should watch chronologically. So let's look at several different reasons that I believe that the watch order is way, way better. So let's start with phase one. Several aspects here. Let's start with the Tesseract. The Tesseract is practically its own Marvel character. I mean, it appeared in 5 movies during what is essentially Phase 1, if you consider Captain Marvel to really be a Phase 1 movie, based on its order to watch. I'll be honest, I was confused by the Tesseract when I watched the movies the first time. But when I watched it in chronological order, it makes so much more sense. You go from it appearing in Captain America, the First Avenger, then appearing in Captain Marvel, then appearing in Iron Man 2 in the drawings that Tony Stark is researching, then the end credits to Thor, and finally in Avengers. It just made so much more sense. So that's a big reason. Along the same line, the Super Soldier Serum. Not as important to watch in order, but still, it has a little more meaning when you watch Captain America, the First Avenger, followed by the Incredible Hulk. It just, has a little more impact to know exactly what that Super Soldier Serum is. Phil Coulson. If you follow his journey, I think it is a little more impactful to see him first in Captain Marvel, to meet him, to learn about his relationship with Fury, and then to see him in Iron Man. Because when he pops up in Iron Man, you're like, hey, wait, this guy's important. Versus, the first time you watch Iron Man, you might just kind of ignore him because he doesn't seem to have a real point until near the end. So I think this order gives Phil Coulson's story a lot more meaning. The Kree twist. I'm not going to mention what it is in case people haven't watched the movies yet, but let's just say there is a big twist that's revealed eventually, but that if you watch Guardians of the Galaxy before Captain Marvel, then the twist really doesn't have much meaning. But instead, if you watch Captain Marvel first and then Guardians of the Galaxy, it's just much more of a surprise to really understand, the full story behind the Kree. I won't say any more, but let's just say the order makes more sense that way. The Civil War fallout, I think it's just fantastic to watch Civil War followed immediately by Black Widow, Black Panther, and Homecoming. You see how all of these characters' lives were drastically impacted, and many more were drastically impacted by the Civil War battle. Speaking of impact, a Black Widow story is much more impactful. If you watch Civil War, then Black Widow, then Infinity War. Again, I won't go into detail why, in case people have not watched those movies yet, but just trust me that it makes so much more meaning when you watch them in that order. The back-to-back movies just work better when you watch them back-to-back. Guardians 1 and 2 are basically a continuation of each other. Clearly, Far From Home and No Way Home directly tie to each other. And of course, Infinity War and Endgame are a package set. However, if you watch it in release order, there are sometimes 2, 3, 4, 7, 8 movies in between. So, movies and TV shows in between. So this order, I think, is way better in that regard. I think the blip is handled a lot better. Homecoming was the first movie release-wise. Far From Home was the first movie release-wise to come out after Endgame. And Far From Home kind of, joked about the blip, which was a little abrupt considering, the impact of it. However, if you watch in chronological order, that means you would first watch WandaVision and see firsthand what the individual impact is to the blip. Then you watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and you see the fallout with the GRC and how important that is. Finally, by Shang-Chi time, you're ready for a conversation over dinner about the blip and the impact and moving beyond it. Eternals goes into one of the major ramifications of the blip. And finally, then you hit Far From Home. And, you are ready to laugh about it then. So I think this order just really works better. And the last thing I'll say is that there are no I am your father moments. And what I mean by that is, there's the eternal debate. Do you watch the episodes 4, 5, and 6 trilogy and then watch 1, 2, and 3 prequels? Or do you watch the prequels and then 4, 5, and 6? Because obviously, The Empire Strikes Back has a big twist in it that, depending on the order you watch the movies, it is or isn't a big surprise. Well, my point is, there is no I am your father moment in the Marvel Universe. Watching them in chronological order won't ruin any surprises. Now, some of you may be saying, hey, wait, what about the end credit scenes? I agree. The end credit scenes can be an issue, and I will discuss that in a moment. But I'm talking about the main movies themselves. The movies don't really have a moment where you'll regret watching it in a different order than the original release order. So, for these reasons, I just strongly believe that it is much better to watch in chronological order, and I would welcome people to give it a try and to see. I recently watched everything in chronological order to get ready for the new Doctor Strange movie, and I just really enjoyed it. All right, so one last thing to talk about before we get to the recommended order to watch the MCU is to talk briefly about the things that aren't canon or are MCU adjacent, meaning part of the multiverse, but not the main universe. So first, the TV shows. Believe it or not, Marvel Studios, in just 8 years, put out 37 seasons and 468 episodes worth of TV. That is incredible. However, at this point, none of it is considered main MCU. Now, you might immediately be saying, wait a minute, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, and the Netflix shows, aren't those close to canon, if not canon? I mean, you could argue they are, because we've seen Daredevil and Kingpin, Wilson Fisk show up, but Marvel still doesn't have them in their timeline. Marvel has them in a separate category, and I think it's because they're still trying to decide how much of those series they want to be canon. And of course, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter, they just have not considered them canon up to this point. Agent Carter was a great series, but if you notice in the timeline, they don't have Agent Carter. They have the one shot. So very interesting. So we'll see. Eventually, those may become a canon, but for now, I have left them out, but I give them a special mention here. Then let's look at the movies. Now, there's many more movies that came out that are Marvel than these, but these are the ones that at least people are really paying attention to right now. And that would be the X-Men movies, the Spider-Man movies, and the Fantastic Four movies. X-Men and Fantastic Four are way up in the air right now. There's simply no way they're part of the main Marvel universe. They would have to be maybe in the multiverse, but if they even happened at all. So those are really up in the air. But the Sony movies, the Spider-Man movies, as we now know, those have been established to be, for sure, in the multiverse. Not the main universe, but in the multiverse. So I would recommend watching all of them right before Far From Home, No Way Home. Actually, either. But we'll watch them right around that time. But the exact order doesn't matter. You could just binge watch all of those movies at once. The only thing to keep an eye out for are the end credit scenes. And notice I've got some footnotes here. Venom Let There Be Carnage, its end credit scene technically happens during the first act of Spider-Man No Way Home. But honestly, since it was released before No Way Home anyway, there's no spoiler if you watch it. And it kind of gets you excited about, what's going to happen in this movie. Morbius, on the other hand, its end credit scenes definitely happen after Spider-Man No Way Home, so you should skip them. Watch the movie before No Way Home, but skip the end credit scenes until after watching No Way Home. So I just wanted to give a brief mention to these. I think over time, more and more of this may become part of the main MCU or at least part of the multiverse. But for now, really just those Spider-Man movies are all you have to watch. But without further ado, this is what I would recommend to be the main universe, main MCU, movies and TV chronological order. I do understand there's a lot going on here. So I apologize, but I do think it's helpful to see it all at once. When you break it up with a lot of pictures and across multiple pages, it just gets hard to digest, at least in its fullness. So I have put it on one page, but let me point out that I have broken it by the Avengers movies. When you binge watch, if you watch all these, it's good to take a break, and the Avengers movies are as good as any reason to take a break. Now, you might say, well, the phases are where we should take a break. But something interesting about watching in chronological order, the phases have a lot less meaning. So, for example, Captain Marvel came out in Phase 3, but happens in Phase 1. Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2 came out in Phase 3, but happens in Phase 2. Black Widow came out in Phase 4, but happens in Phase 3. And Spider-Man Far From Home came out in Phase 3, but really happens in Phase 4. In fact, very deep into Phase 4. So I don't know that the phases have as much meaning anymore, and really the Avengers movies make the nice break so that you're not just feeling like it's one giant thing. Also, I'm just going to point out that I indented the one-shots and I indented the TV shows. No reason other than just visually to make them stand out from the movies, which again breaks this up because it is a very busy slide. So that's why those are indented. Now, notice we have the month and the year. As I mentioned earlier, the month comes from the wiki, not from Marvel. But the year, Marvel has either given us all of these years or has made it really clear when something happens within these years. So hopefully they'll continue to produce their timelines, but even if they don't, I think they're making it a little easier to follow now and trying to stick to a good structure. So you got the month and the year, and one of the reasons I like the months is notice things like that Fury's Big Week. Now you can see how they all are happening right around the same time there. Some start a little earlier, but the main parts of the movies are all at the same time. Thor: The Dark World, if you remember, how it starts right after Avengers in May, but then the rest of it actually finishes in November of 2013, so after Iron Man 3. And Doctor Strange is interesting because it occurs over almost a year and crosses from 2016 to 2017. So these months, they aren't canon. Marvel hasn't established them, but they're about as close as anything I've seen, and it just helps you visualize things a little better. The last column then is release order. And notice that it's got, starting at Iron Man, the first Iron Man, number 1, and all the way to Multiverse of Madness, number 34. Now, anytime the one-shots show up, I went ahead and used the same number, then with an A after it, because really, like Iron Man 3 was released at the same time then that Agent Carter came out on the DVD or the Blu-ray. So that's why it's 7A. Now, the reason I think looking at the release order and release year is interesting is look at some of these gaps. So Captain Marvel was the 21st released movie, but it's the third movie in order, and it has a gap of 20 movies between it and then Iron Man. And if you look at Black Widow, the 27th movie released, yet there it is in between release number 13 and 18. And then I think Far From Home is really interesting because it was released right after Endgame, but look at how many things happened before it in the chronology, which again, we were talking about how the blip is handled so much better. You can see it there. Look at all those things that happened before Far From Home when you watch it in chronological order. So it's just interesting to see how different it would be if you watched it in release order instead of the chronological order. And then I alluded to it, so let's hit it. Those end credit scenes. For the most part, you can watch the end credit scene with the movie or TV show and there'll be no issue. There are 7 times, however, where those end credit scenes are definitely out of order. Now, not all of them matter that much, but I went ahead and for completeness mentioned them all. Captain America: The First Avenger, the epilogue, even the prologue, and the end credit scene all happened before Avengers. So, you could skip those and watch just the movie itself and the part that takes place in 1942 to 1945, and then come back and watch the rest right before Avengers. However, if you did watch them with Captain America, the First Avenger, it wouldn't be the end of the world. It might be a little confusing, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. Then Captain Marvel will be incredibly confusing if you watch its end credit scene in chronological order. You need to save that until after you watch Avengers Infinity War. Incredible Hulk is just a minor thing. The end credit scene actually is replayed with much more context during the one shot, The Consultant. So honestly, you could just skip the end credit scene when you watch Hulk, because you'll catch it all during The Consultant. Captain America Civil War, this again is a minor point, but the epilogue actually happens after Black Widow. Black Widow gives some context into how the epilogue was able to happen. So it was a little head scratching at the time, and then you watch Black Widow and you're like, oh, I get it. So not a big deal, but worth considering. In the realm of big deal, however, though, would be Black Widow. Do not watch Black Widow's end credit scene until way down to Hawkeye, because it definitely, especially not before Infinity War, you do not want to spoil that. So that's one to watch later. I would recommend just before you watch Hawkeye. Thor Ragnarok, minor point, but its end credit scene technically happens right before Infinity War. And then on the other hand, Ant-Man and the Wasp, do not watch that first end credit scene until after you've watched Infinity War. So just a couple points to consider if you watch it chronologically. It's just the end credit scenes, but yes, there are some things that you don't want to see until you watch it in the right order. So, and then last thing I'll mention is notice that Moon Knight and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness are included in here. We know they happen in 2025, because Moon Knight is listed in the chronological order by Marvel on Disney Plus as happening after Hawkeye, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, of course, happens after No Way Home. So no idea what month to even put at this point, but what's exciting is this will just continue to grow over time. So we'll learn more as it is revealed. So I'll leave this up so you can look it over and digest it more, but mainly just wanted to say one last time that I really think you would enjoy chronological order. And while maybe this isn't perfect, it's certainly a best attempt at it. It will certainly give you a good viewing order and a good way to tackle this. I watched them all recently and really enjoyed doing it. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope you enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're living in great times with all these movies and all these TV shows. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you'd like more, and go Marvel.